Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Murray B. Hunter, MD, Medical Director of the Fairmont Clinic, Fairmont, West Virginia. I am a graduate of the Duke University School of Medicine. I took my internship and part of my residency at the Duke Hospital and completed residency on the research division of the New York University School of Medicine. I am certified in the specialty of internal medicine by the American Board of Internal Medicine. For 16 years, I have devoted the overwhelming bulk of my professional time to the care of coal miners and their families, and to the care of respiratory diseases of coal miners in particular. I was one of two physicians who was present at the site of the Farmington mine disaster and examined a few survivors, and I was totally responsible for organizing supportive services of a medical and nursing nature to the families of the victims through their agonizing vigil in the ensuing days. I have been long familiar with the clinical problems of coal miners with respiratory disability, and I have made a modest contribution to the existing research on coal workers' pneumoconiosis. I am neither a mining engineer nor an occupational hygienist. I am not a cost accountant, and my familiarity with the profit structure of the coal industry is probably no more than that of the average semi-informed citizen. It is not by accident that coal mine health and safety legislation are up for consideration together at this time. It was the Farmington disaster that focused national attention, not only on coal mine safety, but on the general socioeconomic status of the coal miner and on his physical and material well-being. Another committee of the Senate is currently investigating television practices. And I would like to say that were it not for the attention that the mass media, and television in particular, devoted to the problems of coal miners in the wake of the Farmington disaster, this session might not be held today. It has been sad practice in our history that only certain disasters become traditionalized. Everyone, all our school children, remember the Maine, which in 1898 cost the lives of 260 Americans. Not 10 years later, over 300 were killed in the Monongah, West Virginia coal mine fire. I dare say that few people in this body ever heard of the Monongah disaster, and fewer still in the nation at large. In order that the sailors of the Maine were not to have died in vain, we entered upon a war of dubious value to our society. In order that the victims of the Farmington disaster shall not have died in vain, it is incumbent upon the Congress of the United States to come forward with the appropriate response, which is the passage of effective mine health and safety legislation. I'm going to rewrite that paragraph completely. In my testimony today, I will address myself to sections 4, 13, 14, and 15 of the Dust Standards Bill. I shall not indulge in the numbers game. I cannot make an accurate estimate as to how many coal miners die or suffer respiratory disability as a result of their occupation. Ethically and philosophically, it really doesn't matter. We may put up with an acceptable casualty rate in war, but we ought not to be thinking in those terms in a basic American industry. There is an aura of tragic drama that has surrounded coal mining in this country that inures us and hardens us to a daily casualty rate. Film and story and song help to harden us to ill health and disaster as inevitable accompaniments of coal mining. It need not be so and ought not to be so. Our aim ought to be to make coal mining as decent and as safe as any other occupation. And if it deprives coal mining of its danger and of its mystique, so much the better. The numbers game, however, cannot be totally avoided because it has become a part of the debate before you. On both sides of the question, numbers have been thrown in the air, either to enlist passion in support of the issue or, on the other hand, to deflate it. The late Dr. Al Kiston of Beckley, West Virginia, in a meticulously designed study of Raleigh County, West Virginia coal miners, found 46% of miners and ex-miners with X-ray evidence of coal workers' pneumoconiosis of all grades of severity. Dr. Jan Lieben, surveying miners in central Pennsylvania, found a prevalence of pneumoconiosis of 39%. Other studies have placed this figure as low as 10%. I suspect that the differences in prevalence from one coal field to another depend on the rank of coal, geologic variation, and differences in mining technique. On February 2nd of this year, in preparation for the legislative hearings in West Virginia, our own clinic conducted a survey of 246 ambulatory miners and former miners. Obviously, this did not include people already dead of the disease or so disabled as to be bedridden, hospitalized, and unable to make it on foot to the clinic. The sample consisted of miners, therefore, able to be up and about and, for the most part, working. The average age of the group was 58 years. In evaluating the data obtained, we weighted the scales heavily against the miner, in that we took as a definition of respiratory disability a 1-second vital capacity of 1,700 cubic centimeters, irrespective of age and height, which is a figure below which no one is regarded by contemporary authorities to have normal or even near normal ventilatory function. Of this group of 246 miners, 54 or 22% were found to have 1-second vital capacities below 1,700 cc. That is to say, 22% were disabled by any criteria from the respiratory standpoint. Of the entire group, 52% had some evidence of co-workers' pneumoconiosis by X-ray, and 12 or 5% had the complicated form. Of our group of 246 miners, we found 74 who had never smoked cigarettes. The rate of respiratory disability, as measured by 1-second vital capacity less than 1,700 cc, in the non-smoking group was 23%, a value identical to the group at large. It's fantastic. I worked up the figures yesterday. What do figures like this mean? It has been stated by representatives of the industry that coal miners' life expectancy now approaches and perhaps surpasses that of the nation at large, and that therefore there is really no major problem. But there's a rub. Currently available statistics indicate that when miners do die, they die a respiratory death, with 5 times the frequency of the general population. What this means then is that while miners may share in the general rise in life expectancy of the population at large, 20 to 25% of them will spend their last 20 years in a very breathless, agonizing state. Respiratory death is like no other, and respiratory disability is like no other. Respiratory death is slow and preceded by a long period of ill health, extreme loss of faculty, and inability to enjoy the normal pursuits of declining years and retirement. It is one thing to lead the productive life of a farmer, a physician, or even a United States senator, and to die of stroke or coronary at age 75, and another to spend the years between 55 and 75 unable to mount a flight of stairs without stopping at least once, and unable to be free of the pervading chronic anxiety that accompanies breathlessness. Can dust suppression reduce this toll? I believe the experience of other countries is that it can. I am in favor of the 3 milligram per ml standard, not as an independent industrial hygienist with any expertise in the field, but because my colleagues in Britain tell me that as a result of the successful adoption of such a standard by the technique of water infusion of the coal face, cases of coal workers' dust diseases have been reduced 5-fold, and that present surveys indicate an even greater reduction to be anticipated in the future. I would like to direct the remainder, this is another one to be revised, the remainder of my remarks to sections 13, 14, and 15 of the Dust Standards Bill, dealing with advisory committees, X-ray programs, and research programs. I would emphasize that periodic X-ray survey of coal miners, while laudable and necessary, is certainly not enough. Periodic survey of pulmonary function, of the rate of decline of breathing ability with the passage of time, of the incidence of emphysema and chronic bronchitis, and of right heart failure, and accurate death data of the essence. Death certificate data in the coal fields, as probably in the nation at large, is notoriously inaccurate. A central registry to review all autopsies on coal miners ought to be established. Coal mining families are not reluctant to consent to autopsy. There is often a compensation interest. But all too often, the proper technique for study of the lung of the deceased is not available at local facilities. The U.S. Public Health Service, or whatever health agency the Secretary of the Interior establishes to carry out research and development in this field, ought to be closely coordinated with the many excellent facilities in the field which have been established, primarily with the help, support, and stimulation of the United Mine Workers of America Welfare and Retirement Fund. Now, I'm not disposed to give out bad marks for neglect. I believe it to be a futile exercise. I think too much of this debate has centered about who got here first and who was Johnny-come-lately. Nor do I believe in agitation for its own sake, over and above that necessary amount of agitation that traditionally has been required for coal miners to draw public attention to their problems. Nor do I feel that this or any legislative body can look to organized medicine for help in this area. All we have gotten from that quarter has been a call for further studies, couched in the most general terms, which in effect is analogous to cautioning against sin and being for motherhood, but doing little about the substantive issues that confront us. I will say, gentlemen, that I have been privileged to be medical director of a handsomely equipped multi-specialty group which has been in existence in the center of a large coal mining district of West Virginia, 8 miles from Farmington, 5 miles from Monongah. And never once has any official of the federal health apparatus heretofore entered into any dialogue with us as to how a joint effort at getting at the truth of the many questions affecting coal miners' health might be worked out. Really, gentlemen, in historical perspective, what we are talking about this morning is the relationship of the industrial system to government and to the public's health. The history of that relationship is in some measure the history of this nation. The industrial system, by its mastery of technology, has produced an affluence of material that, despite problems of distribution, is the envy of the world. But our national ethic commits us to the principle of the sovereignty and sanctity of the human person. By what means is the health of the citizenry to be saved? The industrial system, by and large, has won an accommodation by government to its needs that is highly favorable to it. I refer to mining rights, tax structures, use of the public lands, railroads, and highways. There must be some political force for accomplishing what the industrial system ignores. When there is a conflict between industrial and human priorities, it is government which must assert those priorities against the industrial need. The very survival of the industrial system itself depends on the assertion of this priority. Thank you. How long is that? 15 minutes.